So, welcome to class 157 of Faith and Calm. Tonight, we're still basking in the glow of we're still basking in the glow of Shavuos, and that's we're going to still talk about some ideas from Shavuos. Basically, we're going to talk about the Baal Shem Tov. More importantly, we're just going to tell stories. Because that's what we should do. We should tell those stories. Sometimes that's the easiest way, and it's summer, and it making things lighter. So the Baal Shem Tov is very much connected, as I said last week, with Shavuos, because Shavuos was his yard site. He passed away on the first day of Shavuos, according to most opinions. But Shavuos is also a special holiday for him. And Shavuos is also very much connected with the idea and the lessons of the Baal Shem Tov, because not only do we receive the revealed Torah on Shavuos, but we also receive the all aspects of Torah. It's all interconnected. The hidden parts of Torah, Chassidus, the Kabbalah, everything was received from Sinai on Shavuos. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Baal Shem Tov. That will, so one of the big things that the Baal Shem Tov did in the revolution that the Baal Shem Tov introduced into this world was the fact that before the Baal Shem Tov, people tended to view that God had to do something to come into the world, to affect the world, to modify the world. He has to overpower the world. So the world and God are not one thing. The Baal Shem Tov said that's not the way we look at it in the Chassidus. It's all one thing. It's all united. It's all part of one thing. The world is godliness. Godliness is the world. It's one united piece. What is that? What does that change? It actually revolutionizes everything, because when you look at things that way, all the events that you happen to you, all the troubles that you have, everything else, it's not something separate that's happening somehow without God's understanding or control or being involved in it. It's actually you're relating to God just in a different way. And that's a very lofty way to look at things. And it's a very difficult thing to look at things. That's why there's lots of stories and there's lots of practices that we do to try and lift us up, to receive the world as a beautiful place and a godly place. Another way to say that is to say that that before, if we look at we could divide this up into different groups. We could say, how did the Baal Shem Tov teach us how to look at Torah? How the Baal Shem Tov taught us how to look at mitzvahs, and how to look at the world, and how to look at a Jew. Before the Baal Shem Tov, people looked at a Jew and they said, Torah is something that makes a Jew Jewish. If he does it, he becomes more Jewish, and if less, not. The Baal Shem Tov said, no. A Jew is a Jew. A Jew is connected to God regardless of where he's at. He should do things that are Jewish because he's Jewish, because that's why he should do it, but not because that makes him more Jewish. What's the difference between the two? The difference between the two is, before that, if you look at it the other way, that you have to do things to become Jewish, then you can measure how much Jew you are, right? Some people do more, some do less. I remember the early days when I was on the internet, and that was the very beginning of the internet. There was one Jewish discussion group. There were a lot of Orthodox people there, and they were all saying, trying to come up with a definition of what is a Torah observant Jew. And you do this, then you become that. And that's an anathema to the way a chassid looks at the world. A chassid says, I have no clue how close. You might be much more holy and much more spiritual and much more connected with God the way you are right now. And it's not that you're going to have to do something to become more Jewish, or you become more Jewish. You are Jewish. And therefore, yes, you should use every talent that you have to the utmost, every opportunity that you were given, all the training that you had, but you are already Jewish. But to illustrate this, let's start giving a few stories. So one of the few favorite stories that I hear and I like to use for this, and I don't think I've told this story before. It's a common story. It's a well-known story. In the town of Shpola in Europe, there was a gentleman called the Shpola Zayda. The Zayda means grandfather from Shpola. And the Shpola Zayda, he was a very warm person. And he used to tell stories about people he were connected with. And one of the groups of people he talked about was about thieves. He said he always was hanging out with the thieves, and he was taking care of them. And when they got arrested, he would bring them, he would take care of them, do this and do that. And and people wondered, why are you too connected to the thieves? It's sort of like the Kotzker Rebbe used to say, I learned 7 tremendous things from thieves. I learned from thieves that you should act with alacrity. Don't dawdle when you have an opportunity. You should be brave. You should be pay attention to small details because it might be very important. You should act. You should act with. You should act. You should be confident in what you're doing, and if you don't succeed the first time, you should try again. It's like. So the Shpoly Zaydas was talking about the thieves. They asked them, well, tell us a story about one of your thieves, why you value these thieves so much. So there was one thief in this town, the Shpoly, whose name is Yosel the Ganav. On his tombstone, it says, actually, people looked it up. It says Yosel the Ganav. Here lies a tzaddik, a holy person. And they're saying, what? It sounds like a contradiction. What do you mean? He died, Al Kiddush Hashem, and he was also a thief? What was the story? There were people who actually remember the story, who moved to Israel, and they said the story went as follows. Yosel was a small guy, and he was very wiry, and he was able to climb very well. So the thieves liked him to get into into difficult situations. So one time, they were skinny situation where you had to get into narrow tunnels and things like that. So one time the thieves decided they were going to do a big heist, and they decided the best place to go was the church. There was a big church in the center of town, had a lot of golden statues and other kinds of stuff inside of there. And so they figured that Yosel was a good person because you couldn't get in through the front door, but there was a window way up on top of the steeple if you went up to the roof, and you could get into there. And he was good at climbing, so they sent him up there. And one night, and they were standing out below. And he got up, and then he crawled in there, and he was collecting all the different gold and statues and other kinds of stuff. And then he brought it back up to the roof. But in the meantime, the night watchman happened to appear on the scene, and all his buddies ran away. And he didn't know that because he was like 100 feet up in the air. So there he was at night, and with all his gold, and he was yelling from the top that everybody should prepare. He's going to start throwing the stuff down. And the night watchman is hearing some strange sound from the heavens calling out. And he's wondering, what is this? Is it the second coming? Maybe the guy has come back again, And then some gold starts flying down from the sky, and he's going, wow. He wakes up the whole town, He's come, there's gold, there's statues flying out of the sky. But it didn't take long for them to investigate, and they put him in jail, and they told him, you have anything to say for yourself? And he said, yeah. I wanted to test out to see if the stuff was real or not. And so they didn't defend themselves. They didn't talk back to me. They didn't do anything. So I figured, the best thing to do was just, show people that this is all a bunch of fakery. So the priest was not very happy with that. And they said, good, you're going to be tarred and feathered in the courtyard the next day. And they took him out. And but then he said, you know what? Since you were so brave and you did such a great job climbing, we would love it. We'll forgive everything if you convert to Catholicism. You do that, and we'll give you money. We'll make you rich, and all will be forgiven. And he said, Yosel said, no way. A thief I might be, but converting I will never do. I will never convert out from Judaism. They said, very good. And they took his hands and they poured him into the tar, and he's screaming and yelling. And they say, you still have time. We'll get doctors. We'll heal you. And if not, it's going to be a very bad end. And he said, Yosel will never, he screamed out, Yosel will never convert. He will never change his religion. He will always remain a Jew. He may be a thief, but he's a Jew. And that's why they wrote on his tombstone about how he died in Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's name. Because Yosel Lagana, you don't underestimate a Jew. And when I say don't underestimate a Jew, here's another story that sort of emphasizes this. I don't know how many of you people know of a person named Shlomo Riskin. He's Lincoln
Sorry,
Square.
I went to events at Lincoln Square.
Lincoln Square.
And when we were first becoming frum, he was the rabbi at Lincoln Square.
It was in Lincoln Square, which is a modern Orthodox synagogue in the Upper West Side. And he was quite famous there. He built up a big place. And then later he moved to a town in Israel called Efrat, and most of his people moved there too. And he's still alive, and he's still giving classes there in Efrat. He's clearly a modern Orthodox person, but he had a very close connection with the Lubavitch Rebbe. Rebbe helped him a lot in getting started. In fact, the Rebbe had an interesting comment. He said, I want to make an army. I want to make you the general. And they had the army, everybody should look like you, like a modern Orthodox guy on the outside and be Chabad on the inside. So they had a relationship. So Shlomo Riskin told once the story at a I don't know what, for Bregan or something in Montreal. The story is as follows. So he lived this experience, never underestimate a Jew. So Shlomo Riskin used to have a class Wednesday night in Lincoln Square in Manhattan. And there was a lot of people used to show up. Maybe 100, 200 people would show up. He did it on Wednesdays for the following reason. He would always watch the audience, and he would see if there was anybody new. And if somebody new came, he would have Thursday in which to go find that person, track him down, and find out more about him and bring him in. And he was very successful in doing this. One time, Wednesday class came. There happened to be a guy sitting in the audience, and this guy was dressed very, very smartly, but very casually. And I don't know, the person said, Rabbi Paul Thiel didn't say what he was, didn't remember what the outfit he was in, but it was very snazzy. Anyway, Rabbi Riskin looks at him and says, I like your style. And the guy says, thank you very much, Rabbi. He says, I like you too, but you won't like me. You won't let me join your synagogue because I'm married to a non-Jew. And so you wouldn't possibly let me, actually join your synagogue. So Rabbi Riskin said, it's the public gathering right now. Maybe we could talk afterwards a little bit further, later tonight after Marav. So he says, okay. So he gives the class. He sits down. He talks to the guy. He says, Rabbi Riskin says to him, he says, let me just ask you this. He says, why did you come tonight? Why did you decide to come to our classes? So the guy lifts up his shirt. And he's wearing a talus cotton, very nice talus cotton. And Rabbi Riskin says, what's the story there? He says,
what a talus cotton is?
No, talus cotton. That was the tzitzis. Yeah. Underneath his shirt.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think people know that. Okay, so anyway, he's wearing it underneath his shirt. And he says, this was my father. He passed away. My father's had passed away a few months ago, and I've been wearing it since. But Rabbi, you won't have me because I'm married to a shiksa. I'm married to a non-Jew. So I know you won't have me in your synagogue. So Rabbi Riskin says, you know what? I'll make a deal with you. He says, I will let you into the synagogue, not as a family membership, but a single membership, but on the condition that you allow me to learn with you at your office once a week. So the guy says, okay, tomorrow, noon, fine. Thursday, noon, Rabbi Riskin bicycles down to Lower Manhattan because he was, it's hard, traffic is difficult. And that's what he did. He was a younger man. It was in the 70s. And he gets down there and he goes up to the office and he finds out this guy is rich, just not minor rich. He is really rolling in it. He is into money. In fact, all his offices are painted green because he loves money. And he gets into the office. He comes 20 minutes late. And the guy makes him sit and wait another 20 minutes outside. Rabbi Riskin, when they finally get in, he says to him, Rabbi Riskin, I made you wait 20 minutes because you made me wait 20 minutes. My time is important. So Rabbi Riskin, I'll play these, games. If you wanted to learn with me, fine. If not, okay. But let's sit down and learn. This is fine. And they sit, and Rabbi Riskin had a whole system of how to introduce a person to Judaism, starting with Bereshis and explaining things and so forth. And they're sitting and they're learning. And this guy was lunchtime, so he had ordered a takeout kosher meal for Rabbi Riskin. So Rabbi Riskin had kosher meal, but this guy didn't keep kosher. he had a ham and cheese sandwich, and it smelled. The whole room smelled of ham and cheese. And not only that, but he was swearing a mile a minute, and cursing this and cursing that. That was his reason. He was a very excitable, impromptu kind of guy. And Rabbi Riskin was looking a little uncomfortable. The guy looked at him and said, "Is there a problem?" And he says, "Yeah, I mean, we're sitting learning Torah and you're swearing left and right." He says, "Oh, okay, Rabbi. You know what? I'll make a deal with you. $100 every time I swear." Rabbi Riskin says, I won't take the money myself. Maybe we can find a third party. Yeah, okay, fine. So he said they were going to send it to Rabbi Hecht at NCJFE. Anyway, so the next week, Rabbi Hecht gets a check for $1,800, and he says, "Don't get him to stop. Keep him cursing. I need the money." And this class goes on. And Rabbi Riskin was wondering, after a while, ham and cheese, cursing and so forth. What am I doing here with this guy? Very nice. But then he remembered the Rebbe said, never underestimate a Jew. Never underestimate a Jew. So this goes on. And one day out of the blue, the guy says to him, his name was Bernstein, by the way. He says, Rabbi says, "I'd like to be buried in Jerusalem on Mount Olive. Can you find me a spot?" And Rabbi Riskin says, "Actually, I can't. I'm a Cohen. I don't go there. I don't go to Mount Olives. But I know the person in charge. His name is Rabbi Groner. He's the older brother of Label Groner, and he'll get you a spot." So he calls, he gets up in the spot, and the guy says, Bernstein says, "Okay, now he's a bit impromptu. He says, "Okay, fine, Rabbi. Tomorrow we're flying to Israel." They fly to Israel. Here's the money, So, okay, they get a flight. They go to Israel. They go to Mount Olives, Har Tzofit, and Rabbi Riskin can't go up, but he's sitting at the bottom, and
Because he's a Kohen.
Because he's a Kohen. And this guy and the Rabbi Rabbi Groner go to the top, and then from the top, he starts hearing this cursing a mile a minute coming down. This guy is swearing left and right all over again. And Rabbi Groner has no patience for him. And Rabbi Riskin says, "What's the problem?" And he says, "I'm not going to have anything to do with that, Rabbi." But the next day, he's all apologies because that was his nature. And he says, "I got there, I saw the spot, and then I didn't like the spot. I wanted a different spot." And Rabbi Groner didn't want to give it to me. And why didn't he want Rabbi? Because he saw the spot. He saw his spot was originally like 5 spots away from Rabbi Kook. It was the very first chief rabbi of Israel. And then he decided he wants to be right next to Rabbi Kook. It turns out that he didn't know who Rabbi Kook was at all. He explained to Rabbi Riskin, he said, "I got up there, I was looking around, and I wanted to see if I could see the Harabayit, where the temple is going to be. And I couldn't see it from where I was. I wanted this other spot where I could see that from there." So Rabbi Riskin says to Rabbi Groner, he says, listen, this guy, I'm going to take responsibility for him. I will promise you that before he passes away, not only will he divorce his current wife, his non-Jewish wife, but he will marry a Jewish woman. And that's exactly what happened. This guy, eventually he remarried. He married a Jewish woman. He had Jewish kids. They sat and learned in yeshiva. And he became one of the biggest contributors of all time, at least at that time, to Jewish institutions, yeshivas, and other kinds like that. I looked him up in Wikipedia. He's the founder of many different organizations. He changed his name to Zalman Bernstein. The Rebbe said, you just look at a Jew at their inside. Don't look at the Jew on their outside. Don't look at their deeds. Don't look at where they are. Don't look at how they're reacting. There's a Jewishness in the Jew. And what the Baal Shem Tov Sod is, you don't have to bring God into the picture. It's already there. It's inside the Jew. It's inside the events. It's inside everything that's there. God is here. It's not something that there's 2 separate things. It has to be something that has to be overpowered. The Jew is a Jew, and you know what? There's an inner Jewishness inside the person. And to conclude, I'll tell a very short story, which I also heard, which I thought was very interesting because I remember the story. Probably Paltiel said, there used to be a a Jewish apologist for the Soviet Union. His name was Vladimir Posner. Now, Vladimir Posner was born in America, an American Jew, beautiful English, very suave, very sophisticated, urbane manners, and so forth. And he and his family moved back to the Soviet Union to be in the workers' paradise. And he became like one of the front-facing faces for the Soviet Union. I remember back in the 70s, 80s, he was on all these TV shows, Phil Donahue and stuff like that. Whenever the Russians needed somebody who was, a presentable face, they would bring this guy on, and he would speak very urbane, very sophisticated, very knowledgeable, beautiful English, just well under control. Anyway, I don't know how he saw it, but Rabbi Paul Thiel said he was once watching an interview, and somebody asked him, how do you define a Jew? And so Rabbi Vladimir Posner says, I don't know. He says, you can't say the Jews is a religion because I'm Jewish and I don't believe the religion. And you can't say that it's a nation because Jews don't live in Israel to be Jewish. And you can't say it's a race because there are all sorts of different skin colors and races that are Jews. They went down the list, one thing after another, after another, after another. And finally, he said, I don't know. He punted the question. I don't know how you define a Jew. And Rabbi Paul Thiel was saying to himself, he's saying, silly. Of course, we know what a Jew is. A Jew is a soul thing. You just proved it. It's not your skin. It's not what you do. It's not how you grew up. It's not how you were. Look, you are a Jew because you have a Jewish soul. And the Jewish soul is not something you can manufacture, improve, or change. And this is a core teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, how to look at a Jew, how to look at oneself, how to see oneself, how to see the potential that you have inside of yourself, and to realize that have no idea what your innate capabilities are, what your abilities are as a Jew, and abilities are to transform the world. And that is the teaching from the Baal Shem Tov, and that is one of the changes that he made in this world. Before that, everything was dependent on external activities, and now we see Jew is you can't measure where a Jew is. Who is closer to that? Who is closer? Yosef Lagana or me? I don't know. He can be, as the Baal Shem Tov used to say, the simple Jew can sometimes be much closer than the biggest Talmud Chacham, the biggest scholar. He can be more precious in God's eyes, and he can accomplish sometimes more than the biggest scholar can. So, if you have that ability to be the scholar, yeah, you got to try. You got to use your talents. But it's nothing to describe what the limits are, who you can become. And with that, I will switch over the class to my wife. And we're you can turn on any lights you want.
You know what's sad though? One thing that happens sometimes, they have all Jewish shot, like a Jewish person's soul has all the goodness. Sometimes when they live in a society, there's like a lot of garbage from the society that like piles on top of them, so they can't shine as well as they would be able to.
Yep. There's a Yom that talks about the Jew as a diamond, but a diamond sometimes is found in uncut and under a lot of dirt and sand and schmutz and so forth. And you have to work very hard to pull out that person and polish it and show what the inner beauty is in the person. But without a doubt, there's a diamond inside of there.
Yeah. And like Yasla, it's not so far underneath the surface. Like with Yasla, and it's happened throughout Jewish history that when a person who doesn't know anything about Yiddishkeit is still put under a position in which they have to abandon their Yiddishkeit, they cannot do it. It's like the soul is ever, as soon as you press it a little bit, as soon as you press it to a certain, that soul will just assert itself. Even if the person has no Jewish knowledge, no anything, the soul is such a strong part of the Jew. So, okay. So anyway, does anybody want to say anything before I begin? Close my messy closet. Yeah. Okay, so what I want to talk about tonight is I want to continue a theme that I'm also going to be, I'm just going to tell, I think, a very good story. We were talking about the theme of that the Rebbe doesn't make mistakes. And we know that the Rebbe told us that in 1992, the Rebbe told us that the Geula, the redemption of the Jewish people in the entire world, is unfolding. It has begun to unfold. We are in the beginning of the time of redemption. And it was, and we also, in recent sessions, we've been talking about the Rebbe's credibility is better than anybody I've ever heard of. And the Rebbe made again and again the most unlikely predictions. They came true to the letter. And we spoke a couple of weeks ago about Professor Branover, that he's still alive, thank God. He's a world expert in magnetohydrodynamics, and when he finally was allowed to get out of Russia, he went to Israel to live, but he came to America to see the Rebbe. And I'm not going to go into the whole story, but when he saw the Rebbe asked him, where is he going next? And he said, oh, I'm going to meet some students in Philadelphia. And the Rebbe said, surely you'll meet up with, you'll talk to the expert in your field in Philadelphia. And even though at that point, Professor Branover was a tremendous chassid of the Rebbe, he had become frum through, he'd become frum, and he was like an ardent, admirer of the Rebbe. He said to himself, the Rebbe's making a mistake. I know my field, and I know that there's nobody in my field in Philadelphia. And he arrived in Philadelphia to meet these friends, and the local Chabad rabbi met him and asked, and Professor Branover told the Chabad rabbi what the Rebbe said. And he said, and Professor Branover this time said, but the Rebbe was making a mistake because there's nobody in my field here. And the Shaliach knew the Rebbe to the extent, he knew the Rebbe a little bit better than Professor Branover. And he said, no, if the Rebbe said it, the Rebbe doesn't make mistakes. And sure enough, they found, after 6 hours of searching, they found this Asian guy. He was just walking in the hall of one of the faculty buildings. And they said, do you know any big experts in magnetohydrodynamics? He says, yeah, me. He had just moved there from California. Anyway,
say it again,
magnetohydrodynamics. And
okay.
And so anyway, the guy invited him to come. He was so impressed with Branover. After speaking to him an hour, he invited him to come to California because there was going to be a big science conference in 6 weeks. And Branover said, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry I can't go because my ticket back to Israel is next week. Anyway, on his way back through New York, he told the Rebbe about this meeting, and the Rebbe said, you have to go to that meeting. So by now he knew he should listen to the Rebbe, and he went to the meeting. And at the meeting, he met people from the U.S. Navy. They'd heard about him, and they were so impressed with him. They told him that they wanted to build a laboratory for his field in wherever he wanted to go. And so he had the U.S. Navy fund build a large laboratory I think he lived in Beersheba, and pay for its functioning. Till this day, it's the largest laboratory in the world for magnetohydrodynamics. In other words, when the Rebbe told him to go to Philadelphia, he was not making a mistake. He set him up for the rest of his life, financially and in terms of his career. So, and there are many other stories like that, including more stories from Professor Branover that I've told before. Anyway, this is another story along those lines. And this story happened, and this is the story I'd like to tell tonight. This story happened to Rabbi Gershon Mendel Gorelik. He's the father of a rabbi that both both Yeheskel Shimon and I know. We've stayed in his son's house in Crown Heights when we went for Shabbos one time, and we've gone to him for meals at other times. His son is very famous now. And this Rabbi Gershon Mendel Gorelick he just passed away this year. So this happened when he was a young rabbi. When in the winter of 1959, the Rebbe had been Rebbe for just like for 8 years at that point, and the Rebbe sent Rabbi Gorelick. Rabbi Gorelick was a young guy. He had just gotten married, just gotten smicha, just graduated from rabbinic seminary, and the Rebbe sent him to be the Chabad rabbi in Milan, Italy, with his wife, Basi Gorelick, who's an incredibly impressive person in her own right. And so he arrived in Milan, and he got an invitation in the mail he was invited to this prestigious gathering of rabbis. Every year there would be a very, very world famous rabbi. His name was Yechiel Weinberg. And at that point he was a genius and known all over the world. And he gave classes at this place called Yeshiva Eitz Chaim in Switzerland. And every year before the school term, before the yeshiva term would begin, they would have a big conference, and they would invite the biggest, most prestigious rabbis, the most brilliant rabbis from all over Europe to attend. And somebody would be picked to give an opening discourse on whatever topic the yeshiva was going to learn that year. So they invited this guy. He's like wet behind the ears. He hasn't even proved himself as a rabbi. And they invite him to come to the conference and to give a talk. And he calls the Rebbe in New York. He says, "Should I do it?" And the Rebbe says, "Yes, you should do it." And the Rebbe even told him. He told the Rebbe the topic. The topic was on the Gemara tractate called Masechta called Kesubos or Ketubah. A Ketubah wedding, that legal document that people get married with. So the Rebbe said, deliver your talk based on the teachings of a very huge Hasidic rabbi who had passed away. His name was Yehuda Aber, Rabbi Yehuda Aber. He was a Torah giant and brilliant. The Rebbe said, base your stuff on his. And he told him, So that's what apparently a book had just been printed of that rabbi, of Rabbi Yehuda Eber's, his Torah thoughts. So Rabbi Gorelick didn't have the book. He didn't have access. He called a friend of his. "Can you get me that book?" The guy gets the book, mails it to Italy, and it arrives just before Rabbi Gorelick has to get on the train from Italy to Switzerland. There was a new fast train. It was 1959. It was going to get him to Switzerland in 6 hours. For 6 hours, he sat with that book. It was a brilliant book, unbelievable book. And he immersed himself in this thing because he knew this is not just something that just could, be an embarrassment for me as a very, very young rabbi. It's not going to be such an embarrassment for me. But if I flub it, it's going to be a terrible embarrassment for Lubavitch. And I can't let that happen. This is the honor of Lubavitch is at stake. And so anyway, when he gets off the train and he gets to the conference, he sees it's very clear he's completely the youngest guy there. There's nobody as young as him. Nobody as inexperienced as him. And the big rabbi who organized all this, called his name was Yechiel Weinberg. He had a title, the Seride Eish. He starts the ball rolling, and he starts giving a Talmudic discourse on the topic that the yeshiva is going to talk about. And to Rabbi Gorelick's absolute horror, he gives it on the exact same topic and section that Rabbi Gorelick had prepared. And not only that, he asks all the questions. The way a Talmudic discourse is given is that the person raises many difficult questions about the topic. And he says, how can this be? And how can that be? And how do we resolve this? And how do we resolve that? So the audience gets more and more swept in, and they can't figure it out, and they can't wait to hear the answers. So he's as he's listening, the guy is absolutely doing exactly what he planned on doing, exactly raising exactly all the same questions that he was gonna ask. And he starts feeling sick. He's sweaty all over. His heart is pounding. He thinks he's going to faint. It's like horrible. What am I going to do? The guy is going to finish speaking. And then what do I say? I'm going to be invited up there. I'm not going to have anything to say. It's going to be such, and he starts thinking it's going to be such an embarrassment for Lubavitch. What am I going to do? And as soon as he thinks those words, that it's going to be such an embarrassment for Lubavitch, all of a sudden he calms down and he reminds himself, excuse me, I'm here on the Rebbe's, the Rebbe told me to come. The Rebbe told me to prepare this. And the Rebbe does not make mistakes. If the Rebbe told me to prepare this, it's not a mistake. And I'm just going to relax. And he relaxed. And all of a sudden, Rabbi Yechiel Weinberg, who's talking, the big Torah genius who's talking, he stops talking, he looks at his book, and something is wrong. Everybody can see that something is wrong. And his face turns white, and he says, I'm not feeling well. And he asks for water, and they give him water, and he drinks several glasses of water, and he still doesn't feel well. And he says, I'm just going to go sit down. I'm going to sit down in the audience. So he went and he sat in the audience, and the organizers have no idea what to do. And the people in the audience, whatever. It seems like a small point to me, but it was a big point to them. A lot of them, they were left hanging. The guy had tantalized them so much. And these Torah scholars, they have such an appetite for Torah. They wanted to hear the end of the story. They wanted to hear how this thing is resolved. And they see he's not rushing off to the hospital, but he can't speak. He's okay. He's not not having a heart attack or anything like that. But the thing came to a standstill. So Rabbi Gorelick gets up, he goes to the podium, and he says, with all the confidence that a 25-year-old or so could muster, he said, well, Rosh Hashiva left us with a lot of unbelievable questions. So to the best of my ability, I'm going to try and answer them. And he goes over the questions, he repeats the questions, and you have to be a genius to even remember and repeat the questions. They're so complicated, so deep, so, such intricate detail. And everybody's impressed that he can just even repeat the questions. And then he presents a whole new Torah outlook that this, the guy who wrote that book that he was using, the Rabbi Yehuda Eber, the Hasidic genius, he presents a whole new outlook, and he shows how it resolves every single question that the Rosh Hashiva brought up. And everybody, there's the room is packed with geniuses, packed wall to wall with geniuses, and their mouths are like, they're watching this little guy who barely got out of yeshiva, and they're absolutely stunned. And when he finishes his talk, Rabbi Weinberg had recovered, and Rabbi Weinberg had a habit that at the end of each year at the end of this conference, he would invite certain people back to his house. And he said, young man, come back to my house. And so he came back along with a lot of other prestigious rabbis, he came to Rabbi Weinberg's house. And Rabbi Weinberg said, you have found favor in my eyes. Ask me whatever you want to ask me. And so Rabbi Gorelick said, he suddenly had an idea, and he said, there's a rumor that you gave smicha, that means rabbinic ordination, that you gave smicha to my rabbi, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I wanted to know, is it true? Now, how can you have to understand that the Rebbe, very, very, very modest. The Rebbe never talked about his credentials. I mean, he's already Rebbe of Lubavitch, but he never presented his credentials. If you met him, you saw genius right away. But he never used the word I. He just never used it, didn't talk about himself. And so Rabbi Gorelick was curious. There was a rumor that he had gotten rabbinic ordination from this big genius. And so Rabbi Weinberg said, I'll tell you, it was right before the outbreak of World War II. I was the Rosh Yeshiva in a place in a yeshiva in Berlin. And this yeshiva was recognized by the government. And because it was recognized by the government, a lot of people wanted to get in there because they thought it was a safer place to be. And that's where I was working. And one day, an extremely refined young man came to my office, and he asked me if I would, he wanted to get rabbinic ordination. Why did he want to get it? He needed to live in Berlin, and and he had just come from Russia. And in order to get a student visa, he needed to show that in order to get a student visa to remain in Berlin, he needed to show that he had rabbinic ordination. And so Rabbi Weinberg said, so how am I going to give? So what would you like me to do? And Rabbi Weinberg is, if you want me to give you, he said, if you want me to give you rabbinic ordination, this is what we can do. And he told the young man, who was really the future Lubavitcher Rebbe, he said, here, I'll give you a tractate of Gemara. I'll give you a certain number of pages. Go home, study them, and then I'll come test you. The Rebbe said, no, that's not really for me. The Rebbe knew the entire Talmud backwards and forwards and upside and down by that point, by a long time before that point. He said, you wrote something, and why don't you ask me about that? And he told him, I just read something, your monthly publication. Why don't you test me on that? And as soon as Rabbi Weinberg started talking to the future Lubavitcher Rebbe, he realized this guy knows the Talmud, knows everything about Judaism like the back of his hand. He had never met anybody like that. He had never seen anything like it. And at the end of their conversation, he said, absolutely, I'll give you ordination. And so anyway, so when the point is that this Reverend Krellick thought he was in the middle of a disaster. Why did the Rebbe tell me to study this? It's like, it's a disaster. This is exactly what that guy is saying. And the Rebbe knows what he's doing. The Rebbe doesn't make mistakes. And because of that, Rabbi Krellick achieved immediate fame all across Europe. He's like a little whippersnapper. And the Rebbe paved his path. So when the Rebbe tells us that that the Geula is unfolding, I've said it many times, that the Rebbe tells you something, you can take it to the bank. So as unlikely as it didn't look like Rabbi Gorelick's situation was going to work out. And it worked out beautifully. It didn't look like Professor Branover would get anything out of going to Philadelphia. It worked out beautifully. And so on and so on. And so in hundreds, if not thousands of stories. So we too can take what the Rebbe says to the bank and take heart. No matter how much to the opposite it looks, we are in the unfolding of the redemption. And the Rebbe also told us, he hinted broadly many times, that he was Mashiach. And no matter how unlikely that might seem in some contexts, we can take it to the bank. So anyway, I'm going to end this session there, as we try and give short sessions. And I'll take questions from anybody who has questions. Thank you all for coming.